Hi, my name's Daniel. I'm from the Ultimate Guitar Academy, and today I'm going to talk to you about your new best friend, the guitar. Now, when most people get started in guitar, they make a big mistake. They ask themselves, which guitar should I buy? But what they really should be asking is, which guitar should I buy first? So let's have a quick look at all the different types of guitars and how some of them are more beneficial to certain styles of music and sounds compared to others. Let's get started by having a look at the acoustic guitar. Now, the one I'm holding here is called a steel string acoustic. It's called that because the strings are made out of metal. So it gives us a nice, bright, shimmery sound. When you first get started playing, it will be hard to hold the strings down. It'll take a bit more muscle than some other kinds of guitars and other strings. You'll also find that these strings kind of cut into your fingers, and it will be usually a more painful learning process. Having that said though, most adult students and even young students do prefer the sound of a steel string guitar. It gives us that shimmery, bright sound. I'll play a few chords on here so you can check it out. As you can hear, nice and full sound, really shimmery and bright. That's the metal strings coming into play. You will notice some differences between this and the other kind of acoustic guitars that I'll show you. Most of those other differences really don't make a huge impact on your playing. It's just got more to do with how the guitar works. However, the main feature here is the strings. Now, one other aspect you need to consider is the size of the frets and the size of the neck. Steel string guitars tend to have a medium size neck. So I'm talking about how wide it is at the back, how tall it is, how wide the frets are, and also how much space you have between the strings. I would consider it to be about a medium level. So they're not super close together, they're not really far apart, they're about in the middle. So if you've got really wide fingers, really stubby fingers, mine are getting there, then you might find that your fingers are going to hit other strings and you're going to get unwanted buzzing sounds. So that's something to consider as well. Having that said, I do find that most adult students prefer this kind of guitar, and usually young students will say to me, how come yours sounds so much nicer than mine? The answer often is just that I'm playing a steel string guitar. Next up, we have a classical guitar. Now, these are commonly called nylon string, and that's because the strings are made from plastic compared to steel string where the strings are made from metal. So these strings are more dull sounding, less shimmery, less bright. Aside from that though, the main differences you'll find are in the neck and the fretboard. The dimensions are quite different to that of a steel string. It is a taller fretboard usually, a bit wider and deeper. The frets sometimes can be wider, it depends on the guitar you're playing. What will stand out more though is the space you have between the strings. The strings are definitely further apart, and that has partially something to do with the flatness of the fretboard. So the fretboard itself is very flat and it's not as curved as a steel string guitar. So this gives us more space between each string. And that's great if you need that, if your fingers can't quite hold down the strings without hitting anything else, that comes in really handy. Let's have a look at how this sounds compared to the steel string guitar. So I'll play the same chord progression in a similar way, but you should notice a difference in the sound. Now, I was playing that with a guitar pick, which does give it a sharper sound compared to if we used our fingers. When we use our fingers, the dullness of the strings really does stand out. So not as bright and shimmery as the steel string guitar, but we get more space on the fretboard. Now, you might have also noticed something else. The shape of the body is different to the steel string I had earlier. On this guitar, we have something called a cutaway, and that's this space that's cut out underneath down there. That's simply there so we can reach up to the higher frets. Now, if you're just getting started in guitar, that's really not a big deal. And you can get classical guitars and steel string guitars both with and without the cutaway. Typically though, the way it works is if it has a cutaway, it most likely is a semi-acoustic. And this is otherwise sometimes called an acoustic electric. It's just another name for the same thing. What that means is it has some controls on the top usually, and somewhere on the guitar, down here, I can plug it in to a guitar amp. So I can plug this into a PA system or an amp so I can be amplified and have some loud volume. Now that is pretty handy. It does also add to the price because it's more electronics and more work for the manufacturers. So slightly more expensive, but it does come in handy because you could plug yourself in to record or perform at a concert or a school event or something like that. And last but certainly not least is the electric guitar. Now this is often the reason why people get into guitar in the first place, because they want to be rock stars. So the electric guitar is a lot of fun. It works differently to that of the acoustic guitar. It has to be plugged in. If it's not plugged in, it'll be very quiet like this. So once plugged in, we get our volume. And the electric guitar has a cutaway, as you can see. That's this part down here. Now this one is a bit of a weird shape. This is called a Telecaster. And we still have a cutaway down here. Pretty much electric guitars will always have a cutaway underneath, and they'll usually have some kind of cutaway on the top as well. Not always, just usually. So my preferred option is definitely to have a cutaway for both. It just makes it so much easier to play higher. So if you want to get into some lead guitar playing, then I would opt for a guitar with a cutaway underneath and on the top. They tend to call it a double cutaway. And it is the most common type of electric guitar. Aside from that, the neck is smaller and probably scrawnier is a good way of wording it. Everything's a bit closer together. So if you're having issues with your fingers and not hitting unwanted strings, that might become a bit of a problem for you. But it does make things a lot more convenient to play because everything's closer together, not as far apart. The strings themselves usually are a smaller gauge as well, or a thinner gauge is a better way of wording that, which means they're easier to hold down, easier to bend, easier to play in general. I remember when I was younger, a fellow guitarist, he only played electric and I only played acoustic. I then hopped on an electric guitar and it was dead easy. I was bending strings when I didn't mean to because I was so used to squeezing really tight on the steel string acoustic. He hopped on my steel string acoustic and he couldn't hold anything down because he was so used to the ease of an electric guitar. Now when it comes to the sound, there are a lot of variations on the electric guitar, and that partially has to do with how it functions. We don't have a sound hole on this guitar. We have these things called pickups, and they are what pick up the sound. My guitar has 2 single coil pickups. Typically they give you a relatively bright sound and a twangy sound. This guitar in particular is twangy. Good for funk music, good for jazz music, it's good for a lot of stuff. But if you want more of a rocky sound, you want to opt for humbucker pickups. Humbuckers basically look just like 2 single coils next to each other. Now remember, that's not a black and white rule. You can get single coils the size of a humbucker. You can get humbuckers the size of a single coil. So just check the guitar and find out its specs before you buy it, of course. Typically speaking though, most beginner guitars will have at least 1 single coil, and that usually is at the neck. Sometimes the bridge might be a humbucker. You can get all sorts of combinations of pickups. It's really up to you with whatever you want to go for. But they do give you different sounds. So different pickups give you different sounds, and the placement of the pickups will give you different sounds as well. Like I said, more options makes it more complicated. The sound of the electric guitar tends to be bright and shimmery, but that also depends on what settings you have for your guitar. So there are a lot of parameters here. What I'll do, I'll play the same chord progression again so you can compare the sound. Let's have a look. Now, same chord progression, still played with a pick. As you can hear, a pretty bright and shimmery sound. Sounds quite different to that of the acoustic guitars. Thanks for looking at the different types of guitars with me. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of the differences between them, and you can make an informed decision when it comes to buying. If you need any assistance purchasing the right guitar, feel free to let us know over at ultimateguitaracademy.com. All the best, and until next time, keep shredding.